students?
Not elocution in that sense, but it's certainly possible to take speech training lessons. Yes, quite a number of organizations do that. And one of the latest, I think, to provide that facility is the Hong Kong Federation of Youth Groups, which has a very useful booklet published a few months ago about speech festivals and speech training. The festival, the Hong Kong Festival of Youth Groups, they have a huge building exactly next to the MTR in Hong Kong, in what's the district? Anyway, very easy.
Calvin Bay?
Quarry Bay.
Quarry Bay.
Does anyone have any questions? I actually want to ask for the speech festival, so the students do they choose their own poems to present? Or, like, I guess they'll be presenting different poems. Maybe different length and different content of poems by different writers. How do they choose?
There is a syllabus which recommends the kinds of poems that can be chosen, but within the range provided for each class, they can choose up to a point. But usually they follow the syllabus.
And are they always rhyming poetry?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, no. They may or they may not be.
Because I see in the books, I think almost all the poems have structure. They are rhyming poems. Do you find that for poems with structure, do they lend themselves better for teaching to young people?
Yes, I think they probably do. The way it works is that there is a group of people, some in Hong Kong and I think some in Britain, perhaps also in Ireland, who choose the poems for every year. So for primary one, there are poems that they have selected, and you have to select from their selection. And the same applies right up to secondary 6. So, and the poems are referred to in the syllabus. So that an examiner would be given a copy of, say, one of the poems, and he would have to explain that, he would have to examine that the performance of that particular poem.
I also want to ask, because nowadays there are lots of, I mean, you mentioned the speech festival, there are also lots of speech contests. Some are within the schools or within different districts. For parents and teachers, what are some things to watch for when you're organizing a contest, or if you're a parent and you want to sign your child up for a contest? What are some things that you should watch out for? Because I find that a lot of parents are very anxious about these competitions. Just from my own teaching experience, parents love them. Yeah. Most teachers love them. I've come across some teachers who feel it's kind of extra work for them, having to train the kids, or they would feel some pressure to impress the parents. So, yeah, what are some things to watch for from both the teacher's perspective and also the parent's perspective? And I guess we should also talk about the kids' perspective too, but often we forget in the middle of all this.
I think the parents like them because there is some kind of cachet if your daughter or your son is able to do well and perhaps come out near the top in a particular competition. That's something that parents value, and in fact I come across people from time to time, adults, and in a business for 20 years or teaching for 20 years, you say, oh yes, I remember I was a winner in the speech festival.
I still remember mine too.
50 years ago. Yeah.
There are some very, very well-known people in Hong Kong who really cut their teeth, as it were, their speaking teeth in the speech festival. So they have a good deal to thank the festival for, because it gave them confidence. As winners, it gave them confidence, and confidence is half the battle. What else did you ask me?
Or more like, what kind of attitude or approach should the parents take when signing the child up for a speech contest?
Well, I think if the parents are going to help the children, I mean, either you provide help or you feel that you don't need to provide help, that the child can manage perfectly well on his or her own, or rely on the teacher. But if you want to help your child, then I think the first thing is not to exert too much pressure. I mean, it is supposed to be not so much a competition as it's called a festival. And a festival means feasting and happiness and smiling, and it's not a grim competition. So I think that's the first thing, is to get your child to relax. Look, it doesn't really matter if you win this competition or not. It's fun. So let's have a look at the particular poem, see if we can say it together, or you can say it by yourself, as fun. But of course, you do need to understand what you're speaking, and that's very important. So let's just go through it together and find out what it's all about, what it means, what's the point of it. And of course, you are going to do this in English, so don't be afraid because it's not in your own language. Let's have a look at this. Let's listen to it in English. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. And just relax and enjoy it. And let's work together on what it means, because the meaning is very important. If you understand what it means, then you can speak it more successfully. If you don't understand what it means, then it makes it very difficult. And on that point, there are sometimes children who appear in the festival who don't really know what it is they're speaking. They've memorized it. They don't really understand it. And that comes through very quickly. That, you said to yourself, well, it's a shame that that poor child doesn't really know what he or she is saying. So it's important not to make it too grim, too much of a chore. It's something that should be enjoyed. So let's have a look at this poem. It's a nice little poem. What does it mean? It means this, it means that, it means the other. And other people want to listen to you when you speak this poem. And in order for them to listen to you, it's very important that they hear what you say. So the first thing is to make sure they can hear you. And then the next thing is, if you feel you have to make some sort of movement of your hand, you should make it so that it relates to the poem, to the meaning of the poem. But above all, it's very important that you can be heard very easily also. So have a look at the poem. Let's try to understand it. Let's know what we're trying to say, and then make sure that, because there's going to be a large room in which we have to speak, make sure that people will hear it and then enjoy it.
And if it's a good, meaningful poem and the child's able to learn it and memorize it, that's something that stays with the child throughout his life. Because I remember when I was younger, my teachers used to make us memorize poems, Shakespearean speeches. I didn't know why at the time. I didn't enjoy it that much. I didn't know what the purpose was. But now I know, and I'm really thankful. When I was in school, my teacher made us memorize If by Richard Kipling. and the role now taken by Robert Frost and other Shakespearean speeches. So it does help students.
You're quite right. I mean, these do remain with you for the rest of your life. My memory is not what it was, I have to say this. But I can still remember all the poems that are there and can't be thrown out. They're still there. I'm just thinking of one now, for example. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? And the tedding and the spreading of the straw for a bedding, and the fleas that tease in the high Pyrenees, and the wine that tasted at the tar, and the cheers and the jeers of the young muleteers under the vine of the dark veranda. Do you remember an inn, Miranda? Do you remember an inn? And so it goes on. But if you ask me what the date is tomorrow, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you.
I'm interested to know the role of poetry in education. Well, before I came, I read about poetry in the Roman theatre. Well, poetry, would it be too difficult for the child to understand?
Well, poetry, after all, is just another way of putting words together in a pleasing sequence, isn't it? And the older one gets, the more serious poem that one reads, the poems have meaning, but sometimes they don't have any meaning at all. There are very, very simple rhymes, for example, in book one here, which don't really focus so much on meaning as on putting together some words that seem to go together very nicely.
Just for fun.
Just for fun. But there are other, as you go on, you progress, there are other poems that have significance. For example, after the First World War, 1914 to 1918, and the Second World War, 1939 in some cases, to 1945, despite the horrors of the war, many people who participated wrote poetry. And it had great significance for them when they wrote it. And it has great significance now for all these people who've gone, for those who read it, I think. So it is quite interesting, I think, that in times of terrible conflict, such as those two wars and perhaps the wars that have been going on since, poetry can be a help and aid and something that people might like to write and like to speak, because in a sense it reflects the tensions which they're suffering, but also as a way of exploiting, if you like, their situations in a way that will help them to go through the experiences that they have.
There were many poems about the war, or what were the topics at that time? Is it a peace or something like that?
There are very, very many poems about the First World War, and there are very, very many poems about the Second World War. Sometimes written by people who unfortunately were eventually killed, or written by people who managed to survive. So there are anthologies of war poems, which can be very moving, because if you're in a trench, shells passing over you, you might be killed at any moment, and you find time to scribble out a poem. It can be very moving, and so some war poetry is certainly worth reading. It reflects the horrors of a particular time.
Do you have time to write poetry in such a situation?
Well, some of them did. I'm not sure exactly how many, but some of them did. And some of them did it when they were on leave, if they had a leave of absence.
Some were letters.
And some were letters, into letters too, yes, you're quite right.
Well, for the Chinese, we have poems written after somebody is sentenced to death. Is it Cheung? It's a lot of poets. Well, before they die, they write poems, even with their blood. Yes.
The one question about the speech festival. Do most of the kids choose poems written for the children or adult poems?
Well, perhaps I was a bit confusing earlier on. The poems are selected by the festival itself, from primary 1 right up to secondary 6. So they are selected. And I think there's a lot of correspondence going backwards and forwards to Canada, Britain, Australia, etc., and from Hong Kong itself to decide which poems to recommend.
So they are poems written for children?
Written by children?
No, not written for the children.
Yes, they do try to match the poems to the age group.
So there's a pool of words to choose from.
No, they don't have but they have a lot of knowledge about poems at different levels. So you would find a very, very simple one, which everybody would agree is something that sometimes there's a lot of controversy, a lot of argument afterwards. I mean, some of the adjudicators will say, I don't know why they chose this poem, it's quite unsuitable.
Not suitable for children.
For the children. But there it is. Choices have to be made.
You know, there's recently there's a video on YouTube. There's many people keep laughing at the kid in the Chinese speech festival because he chose to read a poem written for adults. I think this will not happen in English speech festival.
Oh, was it good? Did you think it was good?
I don't know, but I haven't watched the video. But I've heard many people say that he's not natural.
It's interesting that because I look forward to hearing the comments of the people in the festival, in particular the manageress actually, because every year when we meet on a Sunday in December,